Okay, let's go ahead and get started for our third webinar in our series here. Today, we're actually going to be talking about storytelling and proposals and what we actually mean by storytelling, because storytelling for proposals is not your typical storytelling, although there's a lot of commonality with it. So for today's agenda, we're going to cover the concept of technical storytelling, the approach to it, going to go over some of the common mistakes, and then going to just really cover some, kind of do's and don'ts. What are things that you want to avoid? What are things that you actually want to do? What are things that are just kind of terrible to do and very well could sink your proposal? So for the concept of storytelling, when people typically think of storytelling, they think of things like movies or books or television shows, those pieces of media that they consume, and about how it's kind of that device to move people through what you're providing them, what you're telling them, the things that are actually making them engaged, the things that actually keep them at rapt attention. Just think of your kind of favorite book that you've read, or your favorite movie you've watched, or your favorite television show. And what are the things that they did right? What are the things that, twists that actually paid off through it? Things where it actually made sense and maybe the universe that they set up. Things that kept it moving so you never felt just completely overwhelmed or completely lost or lost the thread somewhere and you went, I must have missed an episode, or maybe I skipped some pages, or was there a chapter that I actually missed here? Or even in a book series going, I must have not read the previous book or something because I just don't understand this. Where did they get this? Where is it coming from? Those kind of almost aspects that you hate about a story, or think of something piece of media where you went, this is just terrible. There's no plot here. It's just confusing. It really feels disjointed. I don't know what they're trying to tell me. I don't know what I'm supposed to care about here. Well, for technical storytelling, it's actually taking those same concepts and applying them in a narrative format. It's that very similar fashion where with your technical narrative, even with just the entire proposal package, things have to make sense. Information has to actually kind of flow together. There's that central idea or that theme or that core of something that just resonates and makes them go, okay, I see why this is important. I see why this is something that I should care about. I see why they made these choices, why they actually put this information out there. It's those aspects of making it easy to consume, kind of easy to read through. The things where it's not challenging. So when somebody's reading like a technical narrative and they move between two different sections, they don't go, is this person talking about something else now? What's the linkage? Where's this actually coming from? That's actually good storytelling. It's good storytelling not to do that. It needs to be the things that are impactful and that get the reviewers thinking. Because with SBIR and STTR, everything you submit is going to be reviewed by somebody, whether it's an internal document like a data management plan for NIH. That doesn't go out to outsiders, that just goes to somebody within NIH, a program officer or a program manager, but they still review it, they still read it, they still look over it. Or, for other aspects, like, for for National Science Foundation, for the narrative you create, your 15-pager, that goes out to reviewers that have been pulled in from the outside, and they have to read through it. They have kind of their checklist they go through and look for items, look for themes, look for things that resonate with what NSF wants to do under the SBIR and STTR programs. And it's not just about that narrative. You can't treat these things as kind of separate documents that stand alone. It all has to be woven together. There has to be something that information almost repeats itself. It reinforces itself. It goes, okay, well, I'm telling you about this. I'm putting this information in here, and you're going to see why this is important if you reference, this document, or when you get to this other thing that you're going to read, I'm going to reinforce why I stated this already. Everything kind of taken together needs to read as one cohesive story with kind of one message. So how do you actually do that? Well, there's a couple different things that people want to keep in mind when they're thinking, am I creating a complete and a compelling proposal package? So the first thing is actually really getting in the habit of effective messaging. And effective messaging means creating stuff that anybody can actually consume, creating something that somebody doesn't need to have a PhD in a very specific, maybe aspect of science or a very specific domain of research. And if they haven't been doing 20 years of material analysis for this theoretical material that has just been shown to exist for nanoseconds and small particles, then they can still pick it up. They can still actually, I would almost say, enjoy it. They get why what you're developing is needed, why it's so necessary. You will have technical reviewers, but they kind of come from all walks of life. Technical reviewers will have a background in science, but they may not be the foremost expert in that specific area of science. You could have a technical reviewer that is an industrial engineer, but they may not be an industrial engineer that has worked for 15 years in a specific type of automation for industrial assembly lines. But they're an industrial engineer. They have that backbone in that kind of area of science. And you kind of need to match that. You need to kind of almost match that energy. Very similar for commercial reviewers. Commercial reviewers are going to be business people. Most agencies are going to use a mix of commercial reviewers and technical reviewers, because keep in mind, the heart of SBIR and STTR is about developing an innovative idea into a commercial product. So there needs to be that mix between those two, because there is going to be that mixture between those two in reviews. But the commercial reviewers aren't just going to look at commercial information. They need to see how it's represented throughout. Like when you're describing the work you're going to do, does the work seem the most relevant to actually turning this into a product in the future? If they have ideas about that and it just doesn't mesh because maybe you dove way too deep into the science, then you're going to lose that person. They're not going to understand. And then that will more than likely affect the quote unquote grade you get during the review process. You'll get comments back like that that say, this, I didn't understand what they were trying to say here. So to that point, don't use a lot of, fancy $5 words when those 5-cent words will suffice, just because you think, oh, I'm going to break out the thesaurus because it makes it seem more technical. It makes it seem more sciencey. Great example here is this sentence on this slide. Big, long sentence, has a lot of, really kind of confounding and compounding words in there, and describes a process, and average person's going to read that and go, I don't know what that's trying to say. And I could have said it by saying, yeah, pencils write on paper. And that's the exact thing that's being trying to be conveyed here in this multi-line sentence that uses every, big $5 word that I could think of. Don't do that. That's actually bad for that kind of storytelling device because you're relying on somebody to have very specific knowledge to actually understand what you're stating. And if your reviewers can't understand what you're stating, then you're not going to get funded because they're the ones that have to understand what you're talking about, why it's important. And that creates a quandary for a lot of people because there's kind of that technical fine line that you have to walk. There has to be enough information in there and enough technical information in there so somebody sees what's unique, what's innovative about what you're doing. It has to use a lot of that kind of, well, it's innovative because of this, or there's this thing that it does that is super unique when you look across the spectrum of solutions out there. And you have to kind of include that information on how it works, why it works, how it addresses. So it needs to be a little technically dense, but you don't want to use technical jargon. You don't want to use, things like technical slang. Somebody from the outside should be able to grasp it and go, yeah, that seems like it could work. That's very interesting. It's a new way to do that. It's something that I would have actually never thought of. And kind of a good habit to actually get into for that is use examples and use real world examples that mimic the process or mimic something. It doesn't need to be the exact thing, but if it mimics it, it's very easy for outsiders to pick up. Something as simple as, okay, well, when you do this and you crack an egg into a pan, then the heat actually causes the proteins to whatever happens when you cook an egg that makes it solid. But it's a very similar process for what we're creating and how we turn this liquid into a solid base for this. I didn't have to dive into the, oh, well, this particular mechanism and Moore's law says this and this shows this. But it takes that approach that somebody can get the gist of it because they have seen something similar in action. They have seen it in, the outside real world. They get it. They understand it. And one of the big things that you'll often find that kind of leads into that trying to be technical, given enough information, given that complete package is you need to be cohesive throughout everything. It needs to be that element that somebody sees the entire package. We've talked a lot over the past 3 sessions about kind of what the SBIR and STTR programs are and talked about like the phase 1s and the phase 2s. And then you go on for, maybe phase 2Bs, or then you look at outside procurement or kind of all those different things. And it really sliced the programs down into individual components. But you want to think about your work as an entire project because agencies don't want to fund a phase 1. They don't want to fund a phase 2. They want to fund an SBIR or STTR project. So they want to fund something that is going to get all the way there from that idea to ideation to validation to prototype creation to eventual market penetration. They want to fund something that's going to reach the outside market, a consumer, and solve an issue they have, solve a problem they have. And that same type of cohesion on thinking about your phase 1 or your phase 2 as this larger project needs to be kind of reflected in how you approach the full proposal package. So not just the technical narrative, but the included resumes and bio sketches, descriptions of the facilities and the equipment, the budget justification, letters of commitment, letters of support, they all need to kind of adhere to that central story that you are trying to tell, that impactful statement that you want the reviewer to walk away from, that thing that when they get done reviewing your proposal, they go, holy hell, this needs to be out there. If the agency doesn't fund this, then they would be dumb for not funding this. So even individual elements within like the narrative, like the work plan. The work plan is a very big and very key part of that kind of decision, because what you've done in the past is not as important as what you're going to do in the future and what you're going to do under this period of performance, under this effort, under this funding you're going to get. So information needs to link to that. When someone reads your work plan, they should go, okay, well, I understand this. I understand that they need this type of experience, or based on what's in here, they need this type of expertise. And then when they get to things like bio sketches and resumes, they need to see that reflected in the team. If you have a work plan that really relies on somebody that is an AI engineer with a specific type of coding language, and then none of your people have that specific experience in that specific language, or you don't even have a software engineer, that's going to create a critical hole. Person's going to think, well, they haven't covered that, they're not going to be able to do the work, this shouldn't be funded. So everything kind of needs to work together. It needs to be that a blended salad that you can't really pull a specific component out, or it causes the entire dish to collapse. It needs to be integrated into that level that everything makes sense. Everything is reasonable, because kind of at the heart of it, reasonableness is the clarion call and the thing that people look for. Is it reasonable? Does it actually make sense? Does this seem like something that should be done? And talking about the company and what they do, what they'll do in the future, why you have the tools, why you have the resources, why you have the knowledge, why if you don't have the knowledge, you actually have a plan to get the knowledge, a plan for scaling. A lot of this stuff you don't need right now, but they need to see that you have a pathway. You have a logical progression to get it in the future. Because one of the things with these programs is that even for people that are senior key persons, they don't need to be employed at the business at the time of submission, but they would need to be employed by the business before the award starts, and they'll give you a funding decision. And they'll say, okay, well, we want to fund this. Show your verification that these people work there. So you need to kind of think about all of those different elements and kind of how they entwine together. And a really big thing with building cohesion, and this is more for teams that have maybe a couple of people that are working on documentation, that are working on like technical narratives, that are working on work plan, things like that. The proposal needs to read in one voice. I've done a lot of reviews. I've looked at a lot of proposals. I've looked at a lot of proposals for multi-people team. And probably about 10% of the time when somebody first has me read something, I'm able to not pick out where somebody else wrote a section, because it's not just kind of the words they use, it's the style that they have, the way that they talk about stuff, the kind of way that they present ideas, the examples that they use, the way they link ideas together. So if you have a multi-person team writing a proposal package, maybe have someone actually look at it and go, okay, well, I can see a tone shift here. I can see a shift in language. I can see a shift in kind of focus or purpose. Because when somebody's reading through that, they're going to be able to tell. And then It's not bad to have multiple people, but if it seems like you have two voices that are almost arguing against each other, that just reflects badly on the business. A reviewer will go, well, if they can't even, come to agreement and consensus on this proposal, then how are they going to come into agreement and consensus on the actual work, on getting the product into the market, on growing the business, on being successful? That's just going to kind of sit there in the back of people's minds, and they're going to review the rest of the information in that kind of light. And that kind of goes hand in hand with one of the other big approaches to good storytelling is ensuring readability. When a reviewer reviews one of these proposal packages, they don't really do it in person anymore. Now it's, all online, but they're not doing it where there's a, dense stack of paper in front of them. But even if they were still doing it, a lot of the agencies kind of bundle everything together into one PDF. And that one PDF gets sent to the review panel, to the review committee, to the review teams, to the individual reviewers, however it's represented for that agency. And then they just read it because it's all stacked together. There's a certain flow, there's a certain format. NSF or NIH or DOE or any of them aren't going to just kind of mix it up and hope that it's there. It pulls it out of the submission systems and it goes, okay, well, this type of document goes first, this type of document goes second. But a reviewer gets that package. And, if you think about some of these agencies, it could be 60 pages, it could be 80 pages, it could be 100 pages that they have to read and they have to go through and they have to look at. And nothing just sinks somebody's heart quicker than seeing a gigantic block of text, just no white space whatsoever, everything taken up by, 11-point font, 1-inch margins or half-inch margins or whatever the margins are for that agency and their requirement. And it's just filled completely to the brim. And you go, oh God, is the rest of this going to be like this? Because that's kind of a chore to actually read through, to understand. When it's that dense, probably going to reread sections and, kind of mess up. And that's not a failing on the reviewer, that's actually a failing on the applicant because they need to ensure that it's something that is easily readable, easily understandable. So do things like break it up into paragraphs, use imagery. Use imagery that makes sense though. It's something that somebody should be able to kind of glance at and immediately get why that's in there, what it's showing, why that's actually important, why that's kind of central for you. The old adage works great. They always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So that image that you include, it should be worth a page or two of text. There should be something that is describing, something that shows people. And also do things like, avoid sentences that are multiple lines long. You don't want a sentence that is 4 or 5 long. It may not be a run-on sentence. It may be fully and grammatically correct and accurate, doesn't break any rules. But if it's one paragraph that's a sentence, that's still a chore to read and a chore to get through. You want to make sure that everything you do and kind of the accuracy of your story, the storytelling methodology that you use, makes it as easy as possible for the reviewer to read it. Because reviewers are just regular old people, they're humans. They're going to read it like you would read a book, or you would read a journal article, or you would read a paper. Anytime you've ever gone through something and you go, why would they do that? I just don't understand. That made me lose it. Now I got to go back and reread this. Reviewers are going to think the same exact thing because they are people just like you. So make sure that you are ensuring that everything is readable, everything's understandable, and everything's easily identifiable. And one of the biggest things that you can actually do to ensure that you've done this approach right is get an outsider perspective. Give your package or your proposal to someone that's not within your organization or not within your team or not within your company or not within the space or maybe isn't even, a science person or a technical person. Give it to them and have them read it. Have an outsider review it. Somebody that's not kind of in the weeds and working on this and has been living this for the past 3 years. Because when you do that, and everybody's guilty of it, I'm guilty of it myself. A lot of times when I write stuff, I go, okay, well, this is common knowledge or this is stuff that everybody knows, but common knowledge may not be that common if you've been working on something for 3, 5, 7 years and you have an intimate understanding of it. An outsider probably doesn't. Well, guess what? These reviewers are outsiders. They probably don't have that in-depth knowledge on the exact machinations of your innovation and how it works and why it's unique and what it actually solves and how it solves it and who it's targeting and all those things that just kind of become second nature to you because you go, okay, well, I get this and I understand this and everybody should understand it. Make sure they understand it, fully describe it, fully kind of expound on it, put all the information together. If you go, well, I'd have to actually, before somebody really gets this and before they can really read that and before they actually can understand what I'm, giving them to read, I need to have a quick conversation with them. I need to kind of explain it beforehand. If you have to give them that explanation beforehand before they'll get it, you need to kind of go back to the drawing board because that's something that your reviewers are not going to be able to benefit from. When you submit this and goes through the process, you can't reach out and go, oh, you know what? I didn't really explain that well. Let me talk to the reviewer. Let me tell them. It's not an option. So you need to make sure that it's kind of self-sufficient whenever you submit it. So do those things, kind of keep that kind of stuff in mind, is that if I can't give this to somebody and almost do that like ELI 5, explain like I'm 5 methodology that anybody could get, anybody can understand, my grandma that knows nothing about technology could actually see why this might be important, then I'm not approaching this right. So now that we talked about kind of that approach and the things that you should do, well, here's also some things that you shouldn't do because here are a bunch of the common mistakes that people will actually have whenever they try to create a proposal or they try to create the proposal package or they go through the application and it's just big gaps that are one of the most critical things and some of the most sane things that will keep a proposal from getting funded. So the big one is not meeting the criteria. It can be hard to work through the SBIR and STTR programs. Even, initial information, figuring out what's your right agency, looking at all the different agencies, knowing what their requirements are. A lot of this isn't obvious. A lot of this takes some homework. You have to look through it. You have to kind of figure it out. You have to kind of dive through them. And part of that is actually figuring out what are the real criteria here? What is required in this application? It takes some legwork a lot of times, but each of these agencies publish their review criteria. They publish the questions that the reviewers should be able to answer. They publish the things that the reviewers should think about. And they also publish their instructions. What do they need? What are they looking for in a certain section? What documents have to be included? What are your things like, budgetary limitations, our period of performance limitations, our everything like that. And one of the most common mistakes is to break the rules, not have something in there that's required or have something in there that is extraneous and beyond the requirements, or even, getting back to that review criteria, not following that specifically and covering all the items. Because you can almost think about that review criteria like a grading rubric. When you were in college or high school or any of your classes, the teacher always told you, okay, well, this is what I'm going to look for. Doing this means an A, doing this means a B, doing this means a C, and all the way down. Well, agencies have that same thing. You can look at that review criteria and almost think about that as a grading rubric. And, unlike school where, you say C's get degrees, C's don't get awards here. You need to make sure that you followed that criteria, that you treated it like that grading rubric, like you're going to try and get an A, because A's are more likely than not the ones that are going to get funded, the proposals that are actually going to make it, the awards that are going to be made. So treat the application guide and the application instructions kind of as the Bible of your proposal, of your SBIR, STTR submission. It gives you the exact things that you have to do. And then treat the review criteria as the nuance. It's where you put in information. It's how you talk. It's how others are actually going to look at. It's the ideas that others should be able to see when they read through it. These are some examples here of actual review criteria that are given to reviewers whenever they read through a proposal. First one's from NIH, first one's from NSF. The second one is from NIH, and the final one is from DOE. So you can see here, is there a significant market opportunity that could be addressed? Does the proposed product or service represent an innovative approach? The ability to competently carry out the project as evidenced by the qualifications. This isn't stuff that an agency just says, oh yeah, it'd be great if they could actually, demonstrate this in their proposal. This is what reviewers look for. And if they read your proposal, if they read your proposal package, and they can't confidently answer yes to each one of these, then you're going to be negatively affected. So look through the review criteria and make sure you are actually meeting that. Like create a compliance matrix. It's actually oftentimes these review criteria are broken down into sections and go, okay, in this section, somebody needs to be able to see this, this, and this, these 3 items. And then put it against a compliance matrix and go, okay, well, I see this, I see this, I see this. This is described, this information is here, this information is here. That's a good way to ensure that you are actually meeting that criteria that is going to be relatively make you fundable, let's call it. Another big one is lack of technical detail. So talked about how important it is to have technical information, but not overwhelming the people with a bunch of technical jargon. But you still have to have technical detail. Somebody still needs to be able to read about what you're creating, the background of it, the backbone of it, and go, yeah, this is actually really novel. This is an approach that nobody else has done, or this is a unique way to think about this, or this is a really, unique alternative to trying to solve this. And it can't just be big flowery language. It has to have some elements in there of how it works, why it works, how it works every time. I'm kind of talking about how that, competition got it wrong. And real quick aside, we'll dive into this more in, I think, the next session or next webinar, but everybody has competition. Do not care what you're creating, you still have competition. Because even if people aren't solving the problem, the status quo is the competition. So you need to show why what you're proposing to do is a much better alternative to solving the problem, to addressing the need, to doing something that people just kind of maybe wash their hands of now. And the way you do that is you have to describe how it works. what it actually does. I mean, you don't need to like dive into, like specific, you know, methodologies of covalence or something, unless that's materially important to what makes your solution different. But that is what this is. It's the differentiating factors that change what you are doing versus what other people have done to address the problem in the past. And to go along with lack of technical detail is lack of work plan detail. This is one of the things that is most commonly missed by applicants is there is not enough information in the actual work plan, the things that are going to be done. They just kind of hand wave and say, well, we'll do this. This needs to almost address those 5 W's and H about the work that's being proposed. Who's going to do it? Where are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? When are they going to do it? Why are they going to do it? What does it lead to in the future? Why is this the best thing to do now? All of these need to be represented when you talk about the things that you're going to do. Your work plan are almost like a set of instructions, and it should be treated that way. It doesn't have to be like a bulleted list of task 1, subtask 1.1, action 1.1.1. Also, don't format it like that. That makes it hard to read and understand. Gets back to the readability. But somebody should be able to read through your work plan and have that little vignette play in the back of their head, and almost like one of those old, black and white cartoons or silent movies. And you see the things happening and you see somebody doing it and you know who's doing it and you know why they're doing it. Your work plan needs to be written in that way. And the best thing to do that is you have to provide that detail. But it also has to link back to that technical detail. There needs to be an understanding of why you are approaching things in a specific way based on what sets your technology or what sets your innovation apart. And one of the things that's a little bit harder to address is lack of justification, and on the flip side, too much justification. As I said, the biggest kind of measurement that people read proposal packages with in their head and in mind, and the thing that reviewers are always going to fall back on if they maybe just don't get it is, does this seem reasonable? Does this actually make sense? So if somebody reads through it and they just don't see the need, or they go, well, it's not really reasonable to do this, then there's not enough justification. Now, the flip side is that you can justify something way, way too much. If you have a specific activity, not even a task, not even a subtask, but maybe a specific activity that you're going to do, and there's an entire page of information dedicated to that one activity, then people are going to read that and go, they're really stressing this. They're really justifying this a lot. Or, a budget justification that's 10 pages long, and each person in there has 2-page write-up of exactly what they're going to do, why you need to pay them this, and why this actually makes sense, and all that information. It almost harkens back to maybe when you were a kid and your parents caught you in a lie. Did you fess up? Did you just say, no, that wasn't me? Or, when you were younger, did you go, well, no, let me explain, or let me tell you, and launch into this 5 or 10-minute story? What are they going to think at the end of that 5 or 10-minute story? Yeah, they're obviously lying, because nobody would have to explain it this long. Very similar thing here. Your justifications need to be long enough that someone gets it, but not overly long that they start looking at it askance and going, what's going on here? There's something that's kind of funny about this, because they wouldn't justify this to this level. They wouldn't need to justify that this much if this is reasonable. So now that you kind of have the flavor of it and kind of the flow and the setup, let's talk about some just do's and don'ts. And we're going to do the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the good, the do's. These are things that you really want to make sure that you do in your proposal so that you meet that threshold of reasonableness, that you meet that threshold of innovation, that you're meeting that threshold of answering to the review criteria. And some of these are going to be kind of a recap because it's just, these are simple things that make sure that someone can actually get through what you're creating and understand it and still have it be impactful, still have it be meaningful for that person. Again, make good use and make effective use of white space. Nobody wants to read a wall of dense text. So how can you break it up? How can you kind of move thoughts around so that it just kind of flows a little bit better, so that it's a little bit easier to get through? When I kind of do these types of talks, I give an example about if you're reading a book and at the end of the first chapter, it dealt with the gold trade and the Byzantine Empire in 736 BC. No, AD. That would have been the Byzantine. Anyway, if it was about the gold trade in the Byzantine Empire in 736 AD and how that actually set up for, a revolution in the future, and then all of a sudden, the beginning of chapter 2, you are a gritty Hollywood noir detective from the 1950s chasing the Maltese Falcon, you're going to go, there's something weird here. Something happened. Am I reading an entirely different book? And a lot of times proposals, actually all the time proposals, are broken into certain sections, certain things that the agency wants that align with that review criteria. And you can think about those sections almost as chapters. A section should leave off on an idea, and then the next section should actually pick that up right at the beginning and use that on a central theme. So a good example here is like NIH and the way they do their phase ones and their research plan, which is a 6-page document. There are 3 sections. Approach is the last one. Significance is the first one, and then innovation is the second one. And significance talks about the problem and why it's needed. And so you write about the background, about all the people that are affected by this, about why this is so necessary. And you leave on that thought of, if we could only address this, this problem would be solved. We could save so many lives. And the very next section, the innovation, well, it talks about what you're doing different, why what you're creating is unique, why it's going to solve a problem. And then you pick right back up and say, well, by the way, I'm creating something that will solve that problem. Here's how it actually solves that problem. Here's why it's different. And you talk about that. And then you leave on that crystallizing thought of, but, we can't really get this solution out there until we can realize this specific thing, or show that we can actually demonstrate this, or show that this is feasible and reasonable. And then you pick right up on the approach with that and go, okay, well, now that I've said that, let me tell you how I'm going to make sure that I can show that this is feasible. What I'm going to do to make sure that, or what I'm going to do to demonstrate that this is a reasonable way to solve this. This will work. This can be a product in the future. But again, you don't just treat that one document like that. You treat all the documents like that. They all should kind of be linked together, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they completely stand alone. There should be those items and those elements in there when someone reads like a facilities and other equipment that they go, okay, well, based on what they said they were going to do, based on what they said the need is, or based on how they're going to approach this, I can see why having this type of facility is important, or having these people is actually important. It gets back into just the thought of it needs to kind of all fit together. Another big kind of do that a lot of people will fail on, and I'm going to lump these together, is citations and graphics. People will just drop a graphic in there and then think that the reviewer should understand, or they'll just drop a citation in and go, well, somebody should be able to figure this out. You need to explain them. You need to actually put the information in on things like graphics, label and caption them, and then also explain it in line. Somebody should be able to glance at it, think they understand why it's important, and then you actually explain to them why it's important. Our citations, don't just say, hey, the citation, reference this if you're more interested in finding out more. No, actually give them as this shows, 60% of people face this. Now, the bads are the don'ts. Don't make reviewers jump back and forth. Doing things like saying, see section, whatever, for more details, or see citation, and not actually explaining what they should be picking up there. And people go, well, nobody does that. Lots of people do that. I've seen this many, many times in proposals, or say, this is explained in this document. It's fine to tell them that they can get more information, but you have to give them the baseline knowledge first, or the baseline understanding, and then say, I hope that explained it, but if there are still some questions, this section explains it more, this does more. It always needs to be that thought of more. When in depth about the last one here, just don't break the rules. You will get returned without review, and then you wasted a lot of time, and maybe you'll have another year before you can even get feedback on it. But the second one here is, it's fine to actually bring in, information to kind of have that repository, but don't just copy and paste from other proposals or other agencies' information and go, yeah, that'll actually suffice. There are going to be some ways that you approached it. There are going to be some things that you did to write it that really lean towards maybe a specific type of solution, maybe a specific type of science, something that is just going to cause that incongruity between that agency and this agency. So yes, have that repository of text, purpose, goals, things like that, where you go, okay, well, this has a bunch of information here. Now, here's the central theme. Here's some, accompanying documentation. Here's some citations that actually back this up. Let me actually put this into something like a clean document and then massage the text. And now the ugly are the things to avoid. This total slide could have been the very first one, which is the thing you want to avoid most is interpretation. Don't think that somebody will just automatically assume a certain way based on the information you give. You have to give them that information. As soon as you leave something up to interpretation, you no longer control the message. You no longer control the thought that they should be having, the feelings that they should be having while they are reading it. I've seen interpretations sink more proposals than I care to count. And you go, well, what can be interpreted? Good example here. I could tell you that 30,000 motorcyclists die each year due to traumatic brain injury. And you go, well, that seems like a lot, but I mean, there's 300 and it's the latest census, 370 or roughly million people in the US. That's not a big number of people. I mean, it sucks for them, but it doesn't seem like it's a big problem. I could tell you that, 36% of all motorcyclists, suffer a traumatic brain injury each year. These are all just facts I made up. There's no science behind these, so don't go Googling for my sources. But which is more impactful? In one case, I gave you the number. In the other case, I gave you the percentage. One is going to be more kind of relevant. One is going to seem like a much bigger problem. And that's just based on interpretation. Do I know this fact? Does it seem like it's actually critical? Or, conversely, you could say, 6% of the population, suffers from, this certain disease. Or 500,000 people, suffer from this disease. So which is kind of the more relevant based on the way that somebody from the outside is going to interpret information? Don't ever Give them a treasure map and hope that they actually will find where X marks the spot. Give them turn-by-turn directions on Google. People know exactly where they're going to wind up, know the exact ways they're going to get there, each turn they're going to make, how long they're going to be on, a particular stretch before the next turn. They're not figuring it out. Don't let people figure stuff out because you can't control how they're going to think about it, the relevance they have, their background, their experiences that can change the way that they interpret information. Never leave stuff up for interpretation. Just give people the answer and then give the supporting information. So a couple of final thoughts here. At the heart of it, the biggest thing to walk away from with this is your proposal is in your hands. Set yourself up for success. A lot of times you'll get feedback from people or feedback from reviewers and they go, well, this wasn't in here or they didn't cover this. And you may go, well, but I covered it. It's in there. If somebody couldn't find it, that's not a failing on them. It's kind of a failing on you. You should be able to put the information together so that they understand it, that they can find stuff. If they have to hunt and search and peck around and try and figure it out, again, that's not on them. You have to make sure that everything makes sense and that kind of story flows throughout. So the next session, we're actually going to talk about stuff like developing commercialization content, finding your market, your niche, looking at customer discovery, because again, these programs are all about creating commercial solutions. And if you have questions on any of the information that I talked about, today, and right after this, going to take questions and answers. We started like 5 minutes late, so definitely have an extra 5 to 10 minutes for those. If you have questions on, well, how do I put information together? How do I actually approach this? Am I doing this right? Hawaii has a really great SBIR and STTR assistance program. Cindy, do you want to talk about the assistance program really fast?
Sure. Let me my screen on. Thanks everybody for coming and joining the webinar. That was really insightful and helpful. So just to let you know, the state of Hawaii does have an SBIR support program. We do wraparound service projects to help companies get through the SBIR phases to kind of help you get the best chance you can to move to the next phase. We also do a phase 0. So for those of you who are thinking about putting a proposal together and taking Dell's advice, if you hire somebody to help, for example, if you hire Dell to help you put your proposal together, the state will reimburse you up to $3,000 for this service. So you just have to show us that you made payment to a professional proposal or grant writer, and then you have to show proof that you actually submitted your application for an SBIR award, a federal award. And then the state also has matching grants. So for those of you that do get awarded, the state has some matching funds to award as well. Yeah, we hope to see you at the next webinar. Thanks, Del.
Thanks, Cindy. And as always, questions or anything that comes to mind, if you want to reach out to Cindy, anything like that, my contact information is here. Cindy's should be with the invite, but we have about 10 minutes, again, because I started a little bit late. Apologies about that again, but we have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. So it looks like, Sarah, you have your hand raised.
Yes, hi, Del, and I just wanted to thank you, Del, and thank you, Cindy, for these just incredible workshops that you guys are having. This was just fantastic information, stuff that we already know, but really need to keep hearing. So thank you so much for that, and I look forward to the next one. Thank you, and cheers.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sarah. Any other questions? And if you don't have questions right now, but you want to sit there and mull something over, don't hesitate to send me an email, ping me, hop on a call with me. It's one of
Hey,
the,
I've got a great
oh,
story about putting in the wrong proposal. So just recently, I've got a couple of clients who've got SBIR phase programs, and we were about to submit a new one. And it was like the 11th hour, and my client didn't get hold of me until the 11th hour, and then wanted me to throw in costing. I don't know, but in my experience, costing is always the last thing that goes into these things, and it's always a rush. And so my only thought would be like, hey, you've got to read the solicitation, make sure you're doing the costing right, even, because that's a story in of itself. And it didn't make it because we did the costing wrong because we didn't read the solicitation. So that's, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars lost just because of not reading a solicitation. So wanted to share that.
you know, that's a really good kind of also thing to just reflect that storytelling, because even if you got the costing in, if people wait till the last minute to actually assign cost, create a budget, is someone from the outside going to look at that budget and go, well, with the work that they're proposing, this budget seems reasonable. They have these people, here's the work that these people are going to do. And this is why it's so important to kind of make sure that all those things fit together, because is it something that on its own is going to cause you to fail? Potentially not. But when you look at it as a whole, if you can't even express to somebody about what you're doing, why it's important, how you're going to do it, how you're going to make sure the project is on track, why are they going to trust you with? I'll realize that different agencies have different funding levels, but if you took them on a whole and averaged it out, roughly for phase one, 275K. Why is someone going to, trust you with that if you can't even reasonably explain everything that they're looking for? So it has to be so kind of central to making sure that people get the idea and people get why it needs to be done. People get how it's going to be done. People get where you're going to use the money, where you're going to use other work, where you're going to use support services. That's why it's so important to just make sure that it is that holistic package. All of the documentation just meshes and it's a puzzle. And somebody puts the puzzle together and they have a pretty picture rather than trying to, cut and paste and take scissors to 5 different puzzles and hope that you make a picture at the end. So if there are no other questions, as always, you'll get an email after this recording has been processed and goes up. It'll include the slides. It'll also include a link to the next sessions in the webinar series. But our next session is, I think it's July 17th. July 17th, and it's going to be on putting together commercialization content. So make sure you register. There will be a link in the follow-up email. And like I always say, if anybody has questions, if anybody wants to pick my brain, if anybody wants to talk through stuff, do not hesitate to simply reply to that email and say, hey, Del, I have a question on this, or didn't really understand this, or here's something that I'm doing. Do you think that this actually fits? Is it relevant? Is it worth it? Always happy to address those. But thank you again, everybody. Hope this was informative and hope you enjoyed it. And we will see you for our next session.